He walked into Hollis Graves' saloon with a leather satchel and set it on the bar. The clink of gold coins through worn leather cut through the piano and the laughter. The barkeep stopped pouring. The card players stopped breathing. The room turned slow as a weather vane in still air. The oil lamps along the back wall flickered as if they had heard the news first. The stranger was tall, lean as winter timber, with hands that had done honest work for 40 years. His eyes were the color of creek water after rain. He did not look proud. He did not look poor. He looked like a man who had come a long way to do one thing, and had decided to do it now. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from. The fire's warm and the story's waiting, and we have time. He opened the satchel. Gold pieces fanned across the mahogany in 2 rows, each one bright as a fresh wound. The barkeep's name was Abel Marsh, and he had worked that bar for 19 years. He knew what trouble looked like, and he knew what money looked like, and he had never seen them sit on the same rail of wood at the same time. "I want to speak with Mr. Graves," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from being screamed at by wind for months on end. He spoke like a man whose words had to last. Abel looked once at the gold, twice at the stranger's face, and decided he did not want to know what was about to happen. He went into the back. Through the wall he could hear boots climbing wooden stairs 2 at a time. Hollis Graves came down those stairs the way a fox comes down from a henhouse, unhurried, certain of his welcome. He was a heavy man with a heavy mustache and a heavier reputation. He had been the marshal of Cedar Hollow for 11 years before he bought the badge of every man who would wear it. The saloon was the second purchase. The first was the town itself. "Mr. Graves said, sliding onto the stool opposite the stranger, "You have my full attention." The stranger did not offer his name. He did not offer his hand. He reached into his coat and set a folded paper on the bar. Graves' eyes dropped to the seal of a territorial judge, and the easy smile on his face drained away like water off a heated pan. "I'm buying the saloon," the stranger said. "The deed, the fixtures, the rooms, the liquor, everything down to the spittoons. I'll pay 3 times what any man in Wyoming territory would call fair." A murmur ran through the room like a struck match through dry grass. 3 men at the far table stood up without deciding to. Abel Marsh forgot to close his mouth. Graves studied the gold. He studied the stranger. He did the math a man like him learns to do early in life. How much is this worth? How much is this trouble? And which weighs more? "Sold," Graves said, and held out his hand. The stranger looked at the hand and did not take it. He tipped a final row of coins onto the bar. "Sign before witnesses," he said. "Tonight." Graves signed. The witnesses signed. Abel held the ink because his hands had stopped obeying him. When the paper was dry, the stranger folded it into his coat the way a man folds a letter from someone dead. He walked out into the dark and did not look back. He had been in Cedar Hollow for 19 minutes. He took a room above the feed store that night, because Cedar Hollow did not yet have a hotel it could be proud of, and because he would not sleep in any building that had once been Graves. The mattress smelled of horse and old rope. He did not mind. He had slept on worse and better cause. He could not sleep. He sat in the dark and listened to the town talk through its floorboards. Cedar Hollow was 1,200 souls. Give or take the ones who only came in winter to die quietly. Most of them had walked past Graves' saloon at least once. Most of them had lost somebody inside it. He thought of his daughter then, as he always did when night fell. The night was the only time he could afford to remember her. Daytime had work in it, and work was the only thing that had kept him alive since the letter. Maren Cole learned about the sale before breakfast. She ran the boarding house on Birch Street, and her boarders were not the kind of men who whisper. They were the kind who swear at the coffee and then tell you everything. A stranger bought the saloon, her boarder Tate said, his voice climbing an octave it had no business climbing. Paid in gold. Graves signed the deed over like a Sunday school boy. Maren set down the coffee pot. Her hands, which had been steady through 31 years of widowhood, were not steady now. Her son Daniel had walked into Graves' saloon on his 19th birthday and walked out only because someone carried him, 3 months later, in a pine box. She had buried him in the same ground her husband was in, and she had not walked past those swinging doors again. She put on her coat and went to find the stranger. She found him at the livery, brushing down a gray mare with the patience of a man who liked horses more than people. He did not turn when she spoke. You bought it, she said. I did. What for? He was quiet for so long she thought he had forgotten her. When he answered, his voice carried the particular weariness of a man who had been asked this question before, in his own head, 1,000 times. To burn it, he said, down to the foundation stone. I want the smoke of it to be the last thing those rafters smell. Marin did not flinch. She had spent too many years flinching at the mention of Graves' name to flinch at anything else. That won't bring Daniel back, she said. I know. That won't bring anyone's boy back. No. She stood beside him at the rail. The mare turned her soft eye toward her as if to ask whether this new woman would bring apples or sorrow. Marin reached out and laid her palm flat on the mare's neck. The horse's flank was warmer than the morning. Then don't burn it, she said. Build something where the burning would have been. Build something Daniel could have walked into instead of out of. Build it so the next boy who comes to this town looking for a man's company has somewhere clean to sit down. The stranger's hand stopped on the brush. The mare nickered. Cedar Hollow went on being Cedar Hollow all around them. He did not answer her that morning. She did not expect him to. She went back to the boarding house and set the coffee pot on the stove and cried for the first time in 4 years, in the kitchen where no one could see her. Word spread through town faster than a grass fire in August. Some of it was true. Most of it was worse. The stranger had come to murder Graves. The stranger had come to rob the bank. The stranger had come to claim a woman who had run away from him in St. Louis. None of these versions mentioned his wife Ruth, who was dead. None of them mentioned Clara. If you have been where Marin was tonight, sitting at a kitchen table with the memory of someone you lost heavier than the chair itself, leave us a word in the comments. What would you have asked him? Would you have asked for peace or for something more? Graves did not wait to be ruined. He gathered his 3 men. Tucker, who carried a pistol in his boot and a mean streak in his eye. Reno, who had once shot a man for whistling off-key. And a half-wild cowboy whose name changed with the season and rode out to the saloon he no longer owned. He found the stranger inside, sitting in Graves' own chair, with the deed pinned to the wall behind him like a hunting trophy. You won't burn my place, Graves said. It isn't your place anymore. I built this town, Graves said. The way a man says a thing he has said to himself, so often it has become true to him. You built a den, the stranger said. You built a quiet place to ruin people in. My daughter walked in here 4 years ago, and she walked out a different woman. She walked out because of what you and your men did to her. She went home. She did not eat for 11 days. On the 11th day, she did not wake up. He let the sentence sit in the air the way a stone sits in a well. Graves' face did not change. A face that has worn so many masks it has forgotten its own is hard to read. Ruin my place, Graves said, and I'll ruin you back. I know the sheriff. I know the judge. I own the men who will come when I whistle. Then whistle, said the stranger. Graves whistled. The 3 men came in from the barn. Tucker had his pistol drawn. Reno had his hand on his belt. The cowboy was just grinning, the way a coyote grins at something already dead. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out the deed and held it in front of him the way a man holds a lantern in a snowstorm. Graves whistled again. The men hesitated. The deed was a legal instrument, and even Graves' men knew the difference between a feud and a felony. Set the chairs outside, the stranger said to Abel Marsh, who had appeared from the back like a man drawn by the smell of dread. Move the liquor. Move the piano. I'm lighting the back rooms first. Abel moved. He moved because he was paid to move. He moved because the stranger's eyes were the kind of eyes a man does not argue with. He moved because, when he was 19 years old, he had a sister, and she had walked into a place just like this one, and the rest of her life had not been hers. The kerosene went into the back rooms. The match went to it. The fire climbed the wallpaper like a vine. Marin came in through the front with the sheriff at her heels. Sheriff Tate was not Graves' man. Sheriff Tate was a quiet man who had been waiting 11 years for someone to give him a reason to act. Tate, Graves said, arrest this man. Arrest him for what? Tate said, he's standing in his own purchased building. He's burning his own property. There is no law against grief in this territory, Hollis. There ought to be, but there isn't. Tucker's pistol came up. Reno's hand came up. The cowboy's grin did not change. Then Marin stepped between them. She was a small woman. She was 53 years old. She stood in front of a loaded pistol with the same steadiness she had carried to her son's pine box. You boys want to shoot somebody, she said. Shoot me first. Then you'll have to look my boarders in the eye, and none of you has got the stomach for that. The pistol did not lower. The pistol stayed where it was. But the pistol did not fire. Graves looked at Marin the way a man looks at a porch he once owned and now rents. Put it down, Tucker, Graves said quietly. Tucker put it down. Reno's hand came off his belt. The cowboy's grin died. The saloon burned for 3 hours. Cedar Hollow watched from a respectful distance, and not one of them came to put it out. The stranger was sitting on the feed store steps when Marin found him. The smoke from the saloon was still climbing into the sky. His coat was burned along one sleeve. His hands had blisters on them the size of coins. Let me see, she said. There isn't anything to see. There always is, she said. She brought him into her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had cried 4 hours earlier. She set a basin of cold water on the table and bound his hands with strips torn from her best tea towels. She did not say she was sorry. Marin was not a woman who wasted words on what could not be undone. He sat down at the table and did not speak for a long time. She was my daughter, he finally said. Clara. She was 19. She had red hair her mother had given her and a laugh you could hear through walls. She came to this town because I was working the railroad up north, and she wanted to be nearer to me. She came to the saloon because the preacher told her it was respectable. The preacher was on Graves' payroll. What was her favorite flower? Marin asked. The stranger looked up. It was the first time in 4 years anyone had asked him a question about Clara that did not have to do with what had been done to her. California poppies, he said. She pinned them in her hair. She said they looked like the sun had broken into pieces. Then we'll put them in the new building, Marin said. Whatever we build, we'll put them above the door. You can keep a man burning for 1,000 miles, but there is sometimes one quiet sentence that puts the fire out. A like from you tonight tells us to keep telling these. A subscribe tells us you want another one. The next morning they walked the foundation together. The ashes were still warm. The chimney was the only thing still standing, and it stood crookedly, as if it had lost the will to be square. Marin carried a tin cup of coffee. The stranger carried the deed folded into his good coat. The stranger knelt in the soot. His hand found a brick that was different from the others, smoother, with a faint seam along one edge. He pried it loose with the heel of his palm, and behind it was a folded piece of paper, small enough to fit in a child's hand. He unfolded it. It was a pressed California poppy, still faintly orange after 4 years in the dark. And beside it, in his daughter's hand, 3 words in pencil, "Forgive him, Papa." He sat in the ashes and cried for the first time in 4 years. Marin knelt beside him and did not touch him. She had learned long ago that some grief needs a few feet of distance between the grieving and the grieved for. The coffee went cold in her hands. The chimney threw no shadow across them. She knew I would come, he said. She knew her father, Marin said. She helped him to his feet. They stood in the ruin of a place that had tried to destroy them both and decided, between one breath and the next, what would stand there next. They built the church in 4 months. The stranger did most of the work with his own hands, and his carpenter's hands were the right ones for it. Marin kept the books and the meals and the longer memories. The townspeople came one by one, not because they had been asked, but because there was a thing to build, and they had spent their whole lives tearing things down. The first Sunday, they held a service in the unfinished building, with the windows still open to the cold and sawdust on the pews from that morning's planing. The stranger preached. He was not ordained. He did not pretend to be. He stood behind a pulpit made of Graves' saloon bar, turned upside down and sanded smooth, and he said the only prayer he knew. "Forgive us," he said, "and help us forgive, and give us the strength to build where we have burned." 34 people sat in the pews that first Sunday. Most of them had never sat in any pew. Most of them had never had anything to forgive and had nothing to forgive them with. The stranger did not ask for a collection. Marin did not ask for anything. In the 3rd month, Graves came back. He came with a federal marshal he had bought in Cheyenne and a warrant sworn out on a forged complaint. The stranger was laying cedar shakes on the roof when the marshal climbed up the ladder. The morning was bright enough that the marshal had to squint. "Hollis Graves claims you stole the deed through coercion," the marshal said. "Come inside," the stranger said, and asked the man who sold it. Abel Marsh came forward. He was the witness. He was the barkeep. He had spent 19 years pouring drinks and keeping the peace. He had never once spoken against Graves in public. He had never once felt safe enough to. "I sold it," Abel said. "I was there. The man who bought it paid in gold, and paid in full. The deed is true. Mr. Graves signed it because he saw an opportunity to take the money and walk away, and that is what he did. He saw what was coming before any of us did, and he chose the gold over the town. The marshal looked at Abel. He looked at the stranger. He looked at the 34 church members standing behind the stranger, each one of them a name Graves had wronged. "I'm going back to Cheyenne," the marshal said. "You can tell Mr. Graves that yourself." Graves heard it that night. He heard it in the boarding house, in the dark, in the room where the stranger had once refused to sleep. Marin's boarder, a man who had once been one of Graves' own drinkers, was sitting on the end of his bed. He had a tin cup of cold water in his hand and a look in his eye that did not invite conversation. "You don't sleep here tonight," the boarder said. "You don't drink here. You don't breathe here. You walk out of this town, and you keep walking until you're somebody else's problem." Graves walked out. He was later picked up in Cheyenne for the murder of a cattle buyer in '83, and he was tried in Laramie and hanged in the spring, and the only people who came to watch were strangers. The newspaper in Cheyenne never named the town that had sent him out. They did not need to. The story had made its own road. The church opened in May. It was white with a steeple that could be seen from the road 3 miles east. Above the door, in iron letters that the stranger had hammered himself, was a single California poppy painted red. Marin had asked him what it was for. He had answered, "For Clara." The stranger never married again. He lived in a small house behind the church, where Marin brought him meals she did not have to bring. Marin never married again either. They sat together on the porch of the church on summer evenings and watched the road and did not talk about what they had lost, because what they had lost was between them like a book they had both read. The Mares grazed in the field Abel Marsh had donated for the purpose. The bells on Sunday carried for miles when the wind was right. In the 18th year after the burning, a young couple was married in the church. The bride had red hair. The groom was the nephew of Abel Marsh. They stood at the altar under the painted poppy and made the promises Marin and the stranger had helped each other learn to make. The stranger sat in the back pew with Marin beside him. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The light through the colored glass was the same color as a California poppy in the morning, and the bride's hair caught it, and the poppy above the door caught it, and the stranger held Marin's hand in his, and the bells on Sunday carried for miles when the wind was right. Next, we'll tell you the story of a homesteader's wife who was left for dead in a snowbank by the man she trusted most, and the half-blind trapper who found her by the sound of her breathing. Sleep warm, friends. We'll see you next time.